Welcome back to the Garden of the Eternal Star. I'm Kris.
And I'm Jess. In this video, we're going to talk about various people, groups, and beings that helped shape our path and brought us to where we are today, making YouTube videos and offering advice and guidance for others on their own paths.
I'll start with a little bit of my story. When I was a little kid, I was fascinated by ghost stories. One of the first books that I read and fell in love with was, the spooky account of Dracula. The whole notion of the paranormal drew me in, and that continued into my late teens and early 20s. Eventually, I started researching and learning about magic as a practice and an art. Eventually, I did what a lot of people do. I went to Barnes & Noble and bought a bunch of books, research on the subject. My first experience with quote-unquote practical magic as a whole was with beginner Wicca books, like the ones offered by Ravenwolf and Cunningham. I studied Druidism for a while, and eventually my fascination kind of waned, so then I focused on other aspects of my life. And it was only in 2018 that I did a dedication ritual to sort of the craft and my art. And that was largely inspired by material that I found in the Witch's Bible. Afterward, I started receiving channeled messages, but I didn't know what was going on at the time. So I spent some time doing some research, particularly on YouTube, and the messages led me to a few channels that I'm going to mention later. So I started working with an oracle deck that had been on my shelf for years and years, and I started doing readings for friends and family. Now this particular oracle deck, it didn't have a book with it, and so I had to learn how to read, via intuition, without any kind of guidance whatsoever, aside from the messages I was channeling via spirit. Eventually this led me to a few Facebook groups where I started doing readings, like live readings, one of which was Compassion Calling. Eventually in that group I received a message from spirit, and I was told that I needed to do like a free class on intuitive development, which I ended up teaching, and that was an amazing experience. It was challenging at first, but I found it ultimately to be very rewarding, and it was powerful, especially considering that most of the people who took the class are now doing readings professionally for others. So that was really nice. So give us one moment here, and then we are going to go into the YouTube channels that I mentioned earlier that will be helpful to me on my path. One of the very first YouTube channels that made a huge difference and impact for me was MirthandReverence. It's done by a woman named Annie, and she has been involved in, I think, a number of traditional Wiccan covens. But her YouTube channel is filled with useful information for beginners, especially on their spiritual path. If you click on the playlist tab here, you'll see that she's got some things sort of organized, and in particular I really enjoyed and found value in this, The Flow of the Right, where she breaks down her approach to magical ritual, and it's fascinating. The main thing that you draw from her channel, or that what I drew from her channel, was wisdom acquired from someone who's practiced the art for years and years and years. So I found this channel to be super helpful. And the next YouTube channel that I want to mention here is called From the Light of the Darkness. It's done by J.D. Temple. And he does a lot of work with Lucifer, as well as some other beings from the left-handed path. As you can see here from his videos, he's got quite a lot of content. He does a lot of live streams with other practitioners as well. So definitely I would recommend checking out and subscribing to his channel. JD also has a website. It is linked here on his YouTube page. But I'll give you a little overview there. It's got an intro page like, most spiritual pages. There is a tab here where you can click on for magical services. he offers a lot of different things. You've got some energy work here, some Reiki, as well as a lot of rituals that he will do. So definitely, there again, if you're interested, this is worth checking out. The next main channel that really spoke to me was by S. Connolly. Her channel is called OFSAdrianna. And she's done a lot of videos that brought what I would consider very useful information to the public about working with demons in particular. I'm not going to go through all of her videos, but as you can see, there's quite a lot of content. She has practical experience from years and years of working with a coven that traditionally worked with demons. So definitely I would say, if you're interested in working with demons or wanting to learn more about the subject matter, her channel would be very useful to you. Also, there's a link here to Demonolatry.org, and from what I understand, I think that she sort of runs this site with a few other practitioners. I wanted to mention this site because if you scroll down here, you'll see that they have a free library. If you click there, and it'll load, there's a ton of free information here. A lot of the books that S. Connolly sells online, you can get parts of that information in these free books here. So this is definitely there. Again, if you're interested in the subject matter or just curious, I would say check out this site and download some of this free content. There's quite a bit here. Covers a broad subject matter. So definitely check that out. And I also wanted to mention, concerning S. Connolly, she does have her own site that she runs. And here you can find her books concerning magic, but also she writes a lot of fiction under different names. You can see here that she writes under Anna O'Connell, Audrey Bryce, and S.J. Resner. Hopefully I said that correct. So yeah, these were the ones that I mentioned there on YouTube. These were the channels that influenced me a lot when I had gotten to that stage in my practice where I was going to use YouTube as a resource and as a platform for learning more.
So my own path was very similarly winding to Kris's. A lot of multifaceted and varied experiences. And it was also a bit odd in its development as well. Like I've talked about before, Lucy had been with me from a very young age, but I just wasn't aware that it was her specifically at the time. I always just seemed to sense a sort of guardian angel of sorts. So I mentioned before, I grew up in East Texas. I had a pretty rough life. Lots of difficulties, like with poverty, moving from place to place a whole lot. My family struggled for a long time, and my mom wasn't very terribly religious, but my brothers and I lived with my grandparents off and on for a good portion of my childhood. And my grandmother was very invested in our local Baptist church community. So for a while we lived with my grandparents, and they passed away. And for a little bit I kind of threw myself into religion, into Christianity. And I just wanted to find some sort of comfort or answers of sorts as to why I was going through all of these hardships and all of this struggle basically going on in my life. So
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually during times of strife like that that we find ourselves in a place where we're looking for answers, and because Christianity is so popular here, to some degree at least in the U.S., I mean, it's,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people find themselves there.
Right. So, as quite a few people do have questions, and sometimes there just aren't answers to be had or given, I ended up struggling quite a lot with my faith and Christianity. I went through what I guess a lot of people end up going through with sort of a religious identity crisis. And at the end of the day, I called it quits with Christianity, and I went ahead and just started doing my own thing. For a while I was kind of, maybe I'm an atheist, and then for a while more I was like, oh, maybe I'm agnostic. So there was a lot of questions that I had. So as a kid who was born in October, I've kind of always had a sort of fascination with the occult in general, and witches and that sort of thing. But probably the very first influence that sort of pushed me to look into magic was Harry Potter, which I think is probably a lot of my generation. Was very enchanted with the story in general. But when I was very, very young, I was going through a very rough spot in my life, and I related quite a bit to Harry, the poor kid growing up with the Dursleys. And I was just really envious of him getting to go to a school of magic and, you know, escape his mundane life and his you know, terrible home life and that sort of thing. So that, I feel like, kind of lent to even more of my fascination with magic. And, you know, from as young as the age of a second grader. And I also watched The Craft when I was young, which we should be putting a picture up here for reference. I didn't really understand it much whenever I first watched it, but later on in life I found it again and I watched it again, and I started getting more, grasping more of the concept of the story that was unfolding. I definitely got the sense that black magic was kind of maybe bad, or at least frowned upon, but I just love the movie in general. And even when I was at school, I would kind of adopt that sort of black magic practitioner persona, sort of as a defense mechanism against bullies. You know, ward off the bullies with the hexes. They were fake. They were fake. So eventually I ended up making friends with people, and I sort of settled into a niche that I felt comfortable with in high school. Definitely I was a band kid, but some of my friends, we ended up dabbling with a Ouija board, which can't say that I enjoyed the experience or recommend it to anyone, but eventually I just ended up moving away from spirituality with sort of all of the things going on in my life at the time. High school's a really busy time for a lot of people. So for a while, I pulled away from religion in general, and I viewed myself sort of as agnostic. I didn't really feel very drawn to any sort of major religion or belief. Although when I was in my third year of high school, I did get interested a little in palmistry and spell making, which I mentioned, I think, in our Valentine's video. And I also found this book about fairies, which we also are going to include a picture up here for reference. And this sort of started pulling me towards being interested in Wicca, but not in any sort of practicing sense, just as a hobby. Other movies that also kind of helped shape my views at that time were Practical Magic and Hocus Pocus, which are very popular movies, so I don't think I need to go into a description on them. So like I said, it was mostly sort of just a side hobby, and I didn't really know what to call myself back then, so I didn't really consider a label much. With my poetry when I was in school, I started to get channeled messages, I believe from Lucy, who was very present in my life. And I mean, at the time, I just thought it was poetry, and I had no clue what was going on. I ended up graduating high school, and I went on to college and I moved to Florida to attend a university for photography. And eventually I was in another rough situation, and I was just there in Florida with no ties to any family of any sort. So it was very difficult. And I fell back into depression and believing that the whole universe was in on some sort of cruel joke against me. So of course agnosticism must have been the only answer for me at the time. So I ended up moving back to Texas and getting reunited with my mom. And I hadn't seen her since for years and years, basically. And by that time I was 19, and I had seen quite a lot of the underbelly of the world, so to speak. I still loved the idea of Harry Potter and magic in general, but I did have a lot of bitterness for all of the bad things that had happened in my life up to that point. And I basically stopped practicing anything of any sort. And I just kind of fell into that cycle that I feel like everyone falls into at some point in their life, of going to work, coming home, binge Facebook or Netflix, and then go to sleep and do it all again the next day.
It's worth mentioning here, what you just described right there at the end. I think a lot of people, especially beginners, fall into that sort of theme and process. Like, they're interested for a while, and they do some work, maybe they buy some books and read a little bit about it, but they're, again, like you and I have talked about in some of our other videos, one of which we may link here, if you don't have that intuitive foundation where you can sense and feel and begin to hear the spirits that you're working with, then you're much more likely to reach a place where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, nothing's happening. Like, it's, I'm kind of bored here, so I'm just going to quit and give up. That happened to me, and I think it happens to a lot of people. That is why, and we'll mention later in the video, more information about our intuitive development course and how important it is.
It is so incredibly important to develop your intuition. You're right about that. So, as I was saying, I sort of continued on this sort of cycle of doing the mundane off and on for several years. I also kind of jumped a lot from faith to faith, practice to practice. I just wanted to feel some sort of connection and find some sort of meaning in my life. To list a few, I tried out paganism, heathenism, Satanism, Luciferian, which could be considered similar to our practice, but we do a bit of a different divergence of it.
Yeah, it's definitely an eclectic approach to that idea. Yeah.
I ended up going back to Christianity for a short time, but coming back as a Methodist, which, if any of you know about Christianity out there, Baptist is a hellfire and brimstone approach.
For the most part.
For the most part. And Methodist, for the most part, is a very love and light. Sort of like the Old Testament for Baptists and the New Testament for Methodists, I would say. And then after that, I tried out Pentecostal. And I continuously would jump back to agnosticism because things just kept getting bad. And so eventually I ended up back here in North Carolina. I was dating a girl that I'd met one of the previous times that I had been here. And she introduced me to a friend of hers who ran a spiritual bookstore. So the owner of the store, she ended up sadly having to close her shop because she wasn't making as much income as she needed to keep her doors open. But so she gave me this gorgeous oracle deck, and it's called the Syrian Starseed, which we're going to link up here, and I just fell in love with it. The problem therein is, like Kris's deck, it kind of sat on a shelf for a while, looked at because it was pretty, but untouched because I had no idea what to do with it. I didn't have intuition, so I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing with that.
Well, and it can be intimidating too. I mean, going out and buying a deck, it doesn't matter what deck you get, even if it has a book, even if the book is well written. Still, there's a level of intimidation at the notion of people think to themselves, I think oftentimes, I'm not psychic, so how am I going to be able to read these cards? You know? But the truth is, everyone is psychic. I'm getting cold chills now. All of us have these intuitive abilities. It's about trusting yourself and just getting in there and doing the work.
Right. Yeah, and I unfortunately didn't have a Kris at that time in my life, so I looked at the book, go, I don't think I can memorize all of this. Well, it's pretty, so we'll put it as a bookend. So after a while, I eventually firmly decided on a sort of generic pagan/Wiccan religion for my path. And I knew so little about magic in general, but I had attended some prayer circles and people who did tarot readings at that time, in that time period. And I learned a little bit also about synchronicities, so I wasn't entirely knowledgeless. Over the years that followed that, there was more tumultuous upheaval in my life. I ended up losing the deck eventually, having to move very quickly without any notice. I continued basically just to learn and grow, and I began doing what I now know is called shadow work. Back then I just said, I suck as a human being. I've got to do better. So I started working on healing from my past traumas and letting go of negative thoughts and feelings and energy, and just overall trying to work to better myself. And my biggest attempt at this was whenever I met Kris. And having Kris in my life was just a wonderful experience overall. We did end up hitting a snag at some point, and we went our own separate ways for a little while. It was kind of sort of that age-old adage where it was like the timing just wasn't right. So I ended up doing some more moving around from Texas to here to there and everywhere. I move a lot in my life. And so I ended up back in Texas once again, staying with family. And I started working even more intensely and deeply on just trying to be a better person.
Welcome back. As you can see, we're dressed differently, and some time has elapsed. We actually ended up having some issues with our camera, and we lost about 10 minutes worth of footage that we thought we had filmed. And so when we went to go do the editing process, we realized that footage was gone, and in between trying to catch up with things in our everyday life and the channel, we're just now getting back to finishing up. So, but yeah, I'll let Jess go ahead and finish where she was.
Alright, so for you guys who are watching, this is gonna look just, you know, obviously like what, like a few seconds difference. For us it's like a while.
Yeah, it's been I don't know how many days.
Alright, so picking back up where I had left off, and I was talking about how along my path, Kris and I had, we had tried dating, and things kind of just ended up not working out. It was kind of the wrong timing for us. And so we had gone our separate ways for a little while. We ended up kind of just working on ourselves and bettering ourselves in general. And so, you know, more or less we were individually doing our own shadow work and trying to, like, do better, basically. So it had been about a year or so, and I was working for a pretty great company, enjoying life, basically. And in my free time, I would meditate, go on walks when the weather was nice. I ended up, hello Emily, I ended up making contact with a spirit that was hanging out around my house named Kara. And around that time, Kris and I ended up talking again, and he introduced me to Compassion Calling, the Facebook group he mentioned, as well as some of the YouTubers that he talked about earlier, and some of his own changed views on spirituality since we had last talked. So it was a lot of differences. There was a lot of different new things going on in our lives for each other. So we had both grown and healed in that time that we had apart from each other. And after talking for a while, kind of testing the waters and trying to see how the other one felt, so more or less, we ended up deciding to date again. And eventually I ended up moving here to live with him in 2019. And whenever I got here, we talked so much. We talked a lot about how he practiced. He introduced me to Lucy through a guided meditation, like I've mentioned in previous videos. And honestly, like, that meditation just opened my eyes to the fact that Lucy had been there all along, keeping me from the very worst of what could have happened in my life. Sad that I had made a lot of bad choices repeatedly that led me down the wrong path. And, you know, before Kris had even told me much about Lucy, I already knew way back then that she wouldn't meddle with the free will that we all have as humans. But she will intervene, you know, for her children if we're in desperate need. So after, you know, all of that wildness and chaos, I just finally ended up feeling like I had found the sense of rightness and belonging. Soon after me being here and getting settled in, I did a devotion ritual my own self to work with Lucy. And since then, you know, Kris has introduced me to the works of J.D. Temple and S. Connolly. And together, Kris and I have just grown our practice to where it is now.
Yeah, it's been my experience that most people who walk a spiritual path find themselves going through periods of transition. This is especially true if the spirits you're working with have your best intentions in mind. It's another reason why Jess and I were drawn to serve Lucy. It was Lucy's will that Jess and I make this YouTube channel and our Facebook group and our website. She knew the work involved would be challenging for us, but also beneficial in the long run. We put our heart and souls into making these videos so that hopefully others can benefit from our experiences.
So throughout the last year, we received several messages from Lucy that was telling us, you know, we needed to find a way to reach out and help others who might be struggling along their paths, or who were just in need of advice or wisdom, whatever we could give. One of the ways that we decided that we could be of help was to come up with this course designed to help people who are interested build their intuition and their magical practice from like a solid foundation on up. It was a lot of work and effort, and we do still have a little bit of polishing on it left to do. But we're really excited to be able to share this information with you guys. You know, for those who are drawn to take their practice to the next level, or who are just getting started and they're unsure of what they need to do. And also, we're very pleased to let all of you know, before our course starts up this summer, Kris and I are going to be offering a free set of classes in our Facebook group on basics and introductory material. That'll help give you an understanding of some of the fundamentals and prepare you for the advanced lessons that will be in the summer course. This way, beginners can get themselves familiarized with some of the material ahead of time, and more experienced practitioners can learn our methods to kind of broaden their own approach. Anyone who takes part in our free classes also will end up receiving a discount on our advanced course this summer.
And speaking of discounts, don't forget our coupon code. This one is good for 40% off readings, ritual work, and other items on our website. Also, it's worth mentioning here, Jess and I are nearing our 10th video, and as we've mentioned before, you can send us an email with all the 10 coupon codes from the videos and receive a raffle ticket for a free spot in the course, the summer course that Jess was talking about, as well as a free reading from either Jess or I.
Mm-hmm. So, I also wanted to point out that the free classes that we're going to be giving, those are only going to be available in our Facebook group. You won't be able to find them anywhere else.
Right, yeah, they won't be here on the channel on YouTube.
Yeah, so you'll, if you're interested, we have all of our links to Facebook group and our website and everything else in the description below. And really that's all that we have for this video. We'd love to hear from you guys in the comments, you know, what helped to shape your path and what led you to your current practice. Also, what are your favorite spiritual channels here on YouTube? So yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can get alerts on whenever we update. And also I wanted to remind you guys that Kris and I have changed our upload schedule to once a week on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Obviously, we didn't hit the mark this past Wednesday. There again, as I mentioned earlier, we lost some footage and had some difficulty with the editing, and so, yeah, like we were late. But Wednesday at 9 is our goal, and we plan to do our best to stick to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as Jess said, if you're interested in the free classes, check out our Facebook group and join if you're interested. Not only do we share spiritual posts and funny memes there, we also have a vetting system in place in our Facebook group. So for those of you who sell magical jewelry, or if you do readings, or you have some type of spiritual business going on, if you go through the vetting process, you can share your business in posts in our group, and you won't have any problems there. So bear that in mind.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty cool thing, I think. So yeah, for all of the links to our website and Facebook group, like I mentioned, you can find them in the description below. Also, we'll have links to the channels and the books that we mentioned in our video. So thanks everybody for being here with us, and we'll see you again soon. Until then, may Lucy's love and light guide you all. You forgot to start the timer.
It's okay, I'll start it in just a second. It'll be fine. Okay, I'm gonna start and I'll talk about the thing. Okay.
Okay.